Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so for our third panel, this will focus on issues relating to translation and conversation, and the catalyzing questions for this panel. Okay, 3 true or false questions. Translation can be done without understanding the language. Why or why not? Conversation can be done without understanding language. Why or why not? And then translation cannot be done without understanding the world. Why or why
not? Okay, yes, no question. That's easy, huh? Translation can be done without understanding language. Yes, it's true. We have seen that in deep learning type of translation. But of course, this problem needs to be further clarified. Translation, there are good translation, there are okay translation, there are perfect translation. So I will say translation can be done without understanding, as we have seen, but not very good translation. Very good translation or human level translation need understanding. I don't think you can do anything just for that. So for the same scenario, I guess for the other questions, conversation, yes, of course it can be done. It's just not very good. If you want to do good conversation, you need a much better understanding. Again, I'm not going to say full understanding, but much better than what they're doing now. But yes, if you just say conversation without that qualification, some kind of conversation can be done. Or even traditional computer programming can do very simple conversation, like our, hello world system. Finally, translation, same thing. You can do translation without any understanding about the world. Just again, it will not be a good translation.
Yeah, so I second that summary. Maybe those questions should have been proper translation. Proper translation can be done. Proper conversation. Something like that.
You could say something like human level translation or something like that, right? And conversation.
Yeah, well, the thing that I think is interesting for these 2 topics is really one about time. So because translation somehow seems to be time devoid, because you get these texts, they're already written. You can look at any part of them, and it's random access if you want, and you can go back and forth. But conversation is very different. It has a direction. There are some limitations based on the agent's memory of how many sub-branches you can keep in your head and push onto the stack and then pop them and get a coherent dialogue out of it and so on. So there's some interesting aspects there, but the other one is that this overemphasis on language or replacing language basically with the tokens that we use to represent the language has led AI, I think, down a really vicious path where we confuse symbols with concepts and so on. Okay, I'll stop there.
I really agree with everything that's been said, and I think if you're trying to translate poetry, for example, or trying to translate things that are difficult to express in a language, then you're going to need to bring more understanding resources to bear. I think that it's surprising how far we've been able to get without understanding in our ability to do translations. And part of that may be that we're so willing to fill in the gaps in our own mind as if we're speaking to a non-native speaker, that we're able to guess what the original intention was before the translation happened.
Okay, when it comes to translation, as a translator for 20 years, I would like to say no, but even for humans, I got a situation that I had to translate like battery industry line, like some chemical stuff. I got the vocabulary, Polish, Japanese, and I just had it in front of my eyes. And without any understanding, I did interpret it. So I think, well, even for humans, it's true. So I'm not sure about the conversation. We made lots of different kinds of chatbots, task-oriented, non-task-oriented, but they're really silly. This is why we concentrate on knowledge. I don't know if it will be understanding, but when they know something about the world, it sounds much cleverer, it's much better.
Okay. Questions?
Yeah, that was the or did you want to say something?
Oh, no.
And that's the only difference between the first and the third question is whether we're talking about understanding of a language or understanding of the world. And I would like to ask the panelists what they think it means to understand the language versus understanding the world. And which one is necessary for translation and conversation?
To me, when we say language, actually we typically mean two different things. One is the vocabulary, actually is a concept system associated to a certain language. In that sense, it's very similar to the world, even though, of course, some things missing already, you don't have the sensory motor, direct, that kind of thing. But other than that, it's very similar. On the other hand, when we say we understand language, also there's, say, grammar, syntax, that kind of thing, which is not related to the world. So clearly, these two questions to me are closely related, even though they're not the same question.
Yeah, I think a good example of how these are separate things is, well, I'm not a dog owner, but I'm sure there are some in the audience. When a dog demonstrates some level of understanding by alerting its owner to some impending danger or something of that kind or similar, I don't think it's based on correlations that the dog's brain has picked up over many years of training. I think it's really much closer to human level understanding, and yet the dog is not really capable of much language at all. I mean, some language. Similar demonstrations in other animals have shown, for instance, the experiments with the crow that bends the paperclip to dig out a worm from a vial. And in this experiment, the crow actually, there's a video of this, you can watch it. You can see for yourself that the crow bends this paperclip in 3 different ways on 3 different occasions. It's clearly not a scripted something that the crow was born with. And so there's a level of understanding required for something like this where that has to do with materials. The paperclip is pliable. You can change its shape. It's thin enough to fit into this hole. There's a distance from the hole on the vial to the bottom of the vial where the worm is or whatever it is it's digging out. And that by holding it on this end, you can stick it in and then dig this thing out and overcome gravity. I mean, there's an incredible level of sophistication to this. And yes, we only have one example of this on video, but I don't care. One example is enough, to show that clearly understanding can be done separately from language or anything else. In fact, understanding the world is a process on which language attaches, in my opinion. And So understanding language is ultimately, not really possible to do properly without understanding what the language refers to. And those are two separate things.
If you're interested in a test for how well your system's understanding this, you might want to look into Winograd schemas. They're things like, he tried to put the guitar in the box, but it was too small. And the question is the box too small or is the guitar too small? Without understanding the world, you can't really parse that sentence properly to know what the it is referring to. So that's just one connection between the world and language, where you require common sense understanding of the world in order to parse the language.
I have not much to add. I just add that Winograd schemas are dealt with, and we are getting better.
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience for this panel? Any other?
Are there any really confusing questions like that that might be ridiculous for us? Like, why isn't everything?
He needs some thrill for the movie.
I should really practice what I preach. How about confusing questions and how to deal with them? Like, why isn't everything bigger than it actually is? Or what colour is the number 17? How would AI deal with these? And how would it detect it was obviously ridiculous questions?
Well, currently in RC, if you ask that kind of thing, you basically get no answer. It basically shows that system have no understanding about it. Even though it understands each individual words maybe, but it cannot get an answer, a meaningful answer to the question. So it will be ignored, actually.
But I mean, what nature, what kind of development you see in the progress of AI that would be able to handle these sorts of questions?
For this kind of thing, basically, when we say we have no understanding, it's because the system cannot build meaningful relations between this question and the existent knowledge. In the future, we can have a higher level rule or operation, say whenever that kind of thing happens, the system will just simply say, it doesn't make sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
What's the difference between a crocodile?
A croc and a dial. You can dial, you can dial a dial on a croc, and then you put stuff in.
The right answer is it can neither play guitar. Yeah, I don't really have a good answer to that. I think that's an interesting question, actually. And I will give it some thought.
My system would happily come up with an answer to any sort of question like that you put in, but it would be completely nonsensical, whatever it came up with. Maybe that's the appropriate response.
And in that case, actually, Pace system wins.
I'm afraid my system wins. I just asked it and it said, okay, red is the color of 17. Red 17 is a company in Philadelphia and it's not connected to cleaning, so sorry, I cannot clean.
Thanks.
Other questions?
Yeah, no, we are supposed to go. Okay, at the risk of talking about what I don't really know too much about, you mentioned Winograd schema. It always seemed to me that, yes, those sentences are ambiguous, but there are basically usually two ways to parse them. Shouldn't be that difficult to parse them in those exact two ways. Then you have to disambiguate between them, but it's a multiple choice with two possible answers, and it doesn't seem necessarily like you would need very deep understanding. Like, you can just do some statistical learning where you know, like, suitcase big, teddy bear small, whatever. Like, I don't know. It seems like you could do fairly well without actually understanding, but you know more about this than me, so please.
I think there's a limit to how well you can do with only statistical methods, and that we've been constantly surprised with how well that the statistical methods have performed, but I still feel confident that eventually that's going to top out. There's just too many possible sentences that you'll be able to collect statistics on every possible sentence.
But I don't think you have to collect statistics on every possible sentence. It seems like you just need to collect statistics on word associations, because in your disambiguation of the sentences, like you have two options, you know, like it's about suitcases and teddy bears, or I don't know the exact example, but and then you just look in your knowledge base to suitcases and teddy bears, and there will be some word associations with that. So you don't need to have the statistics of every entire sentence, but and I'm also not saying you can answer absolutely everything correctly. I don't think that's entirely feasible, but it seems like you could still, like a lot of tests that we've had, like the Turing test, I feel like in theory it should be a sort of sufficient test of intelligence, but in practice the judges are kind of, you know, not good enough at distinguishing, and I feel like maybe with vinaigrette schema you can score like 99% or something. Yeah, maybe not 100, but you know, it's sufficient to fool basically everyone. I don't know.
As far as current systems go, they're much worse at vinaigrette schemas than things like identifying objects in images or other things that other language tasks. So it still seems like it's beyond what the current statistical methods are able to do.
Okay, I think maybe I'm just being too demanding in the sense that it may be a very good test. I'm not denying that. Very good test for current state of the art. I'm not sure if it's goes far enough.
Sure.
Any other questions? Any other comments from the panel? Okay, let's move on to the final